My name is Emanuel Tumushime. I am a political analyst, but also much more specifically a public policy researcher and specialist. I have interests in policy research, but specifically social policy, issues of regional security. I have interests in inclusion and good governance. As a specialist, as a researcher, as an analyst, I trade around those areas. I am able to analyze any issue, public policy. With regard to the issue at hand, which is regional security, I'll make a brief comment on the East African Standby Force, or the East African response within the region, but specifically the Eastern DRC conflict. I think to understand what's happening in DRC, with regard to the M23 conflict, I think we have to bring into space about 3 or 4 issues. One, you can't talk M23 without talking about Rwanda. And therefore you can't talk about Rwanda without talking about the effect of genocide of 1994 and the mass migration of a massive Hutu militia group that en masse moved to Eastern DRC as the genocide or RPF war came to what one can call its end or its climax. And that mass movement of the Hutu militia or fighting group, whatever name you want to use, is probably fast forward what brings us to where we are. So the several issues, number one, to do with that, therefore, even the current conflict, you cannot underestimate the mentioned role of Rwanda, whether to follow up on the FDLR, the militia group that left Rwanda, or M23 also has to be understood in that context because it's an offshoot of what transpired in Rwanda then. You have to think about other issues in the region. You have to think about the role of the UN intervention force. After the start of what is now an M23 conflict, the UN came was given a mandate to come into the region with a view to protect the citizens of either of what is perceived to be of Rwandese descent or the citizens of DRC themselves from the attacks of what was then seen as militia groups. So the UN comes in to protect civilians, and one can say has it played this role? Very many analysts will think the UN is not playing its rightful role of the protection of the lives and properties of citizens, and therefore that is an evident gap, and increasingly that vacuum is what has been wanting to be filled by the likes of M23. But what is M23? It is known by all those who follow the politics and the security situation within the region that M23 has to be seen in the context of genocide, of the influx in DRC of a group from Rwanda, and therefore also the role of the Rwanda government. What does M23 say? M23 says it has picked up its arms because there is discrimination within the DRC establishment. It also quotes very many cases of xenophobia, but also highlights issues of corruption within the Congolese government. The Congo government, DRC government, responds by saying the M23 can't stand on its own. M23 is really, you're talking about Rwanda. It's often quoted in the media. That's one issue. Number two, that talks about M23 broadly. Again, I think it's the weakness of the state of DRC as a government. DRC is not able, according to many, to protect its borders, yet its borders are of interest to all the neighbors. It explains why Uganda is interested. Uganda is probably interested because on the DRC soil, as often said by the Ugandan government, is ADF, and through extension, ISIS, because ADF says it subscribes to the ISIS ideology. And I think if you talk about ISIS, then you also bring in aspects of global terrorism. A multiplicity of those issues and the failure of the Congo state to protect its borders is what again brings the Eastern African Standby Force or regional security establishment into now DRC. There is Rwanda, there is Burundi, there is Uganda, there is Burundi, and there is Kenya. Uganda is interested in the peace in DRC again, like I've cited, for the ADF could spread, but also Uganda has a long boundary from Kisoro up to West Nile. Burundi is interested because it's also a neighbor. It could, so there are genuine interests of the East African states, and the other issue is trade interests. Uganda has been trying to do roads in DRC, but not really because Uganda loves DRC, but probably because Uganda would love to do those roads because of trade interests of the country. And this eastern part of DRC, largely, the state of DRC is absent. It is absent in people's lives, and therefore there are very many trade opportunities for many countries that are around DRC. That also brings into perspective probably Kenya, because Kenya also has interests in trade in the DRC, and specifically in the eastern DRC. It's a big question. Is East African Standby Force justified to be there for the interests of trade, for the interests of peace and security within the countries? I think there is a justification for these countries to participate in bringing peace in eastern DRC, especially if you think about the absence of the state of DRC within that region. Should the UN play a role? I think many will say the UN has played a failing role in the DRC. So the neighbors will say the UN has failed. It's the reason why the M23s have built and probably another 120 or plus militia groups. And so the neighbors, I think specifically the East African community forces, have the justification as to why they would want to participate in the pacifying of the Eastern DRC. Again, because this commentary is made from Uganda, the part that neighbors Uganda where M23 is a food basket. When there are issues of food supply within Uganda, that part of DRC somehow plays a role in filling the food gaps for Uganda and for generally the region. Therefore, there is a justification for us to find peace in eastern Congo. It is of interest to everybody that neighbors DRC. I think you can look at that from two perspectives. Number one, you can think about Pan-Africanism as an ideology. The Uganda will say, or Burundi will say, or Kenya will say, we are in DRC because we are Pan-Africanists. what hurts my neighbor hurts me because we are brothers and sisters. So there is a Pan-Africanist kind of description for the response of the East African by force. But secondly, the question that you asked to do with trade interests, the bilateralism, it's really about it's about interests. The number one protector of Uganda's interests is the president. So there are interests of Uganda within DRC. There are also interests of Burundi within DRC. I think also Rwanda has its own interests in Burundi. So broadly, there are interests that Uganda would want to protect, that the president would want to protect, or for his people. And similarly, I think Paul Kagame, His Excellency, has his own interests for himself and for his country. Similarly, Burundi, they could be trade, they could be security, but is it interests? Yes. Expansionism, conquering using expansionism as a way of conquest has somehow ended. It now has to do with whom can you ally with for bigger interests. And in this case, like I mentioned earlier, Uganda was very clear. It wanted to build roads in the DRC. And that's an interest to protect. But build roads for who? Build roads for Uganda's trade. But also, and I think that's why Tshisekedi probably, His Excellency Tshisekedi allowed, because they not only then would serve Uganda's trade interests, but they would serve DRC's security interests, because then those roads become security roads. So, is it about interests? Yes. Is Uganda safe with a neighbor that is hosting hostilities, either by design or by this guy seeing that there is space to occupy? Uganda is not safe if ADF is in Congo. I believe that. So, can ADF spread up to Ruchuru, up to Goma? Yes, they can, because, again, like I said, there is evidence of the absence of the state of DRC in the whole of that stretch that neighbors that side of the Ugandan border. So, it is Uganda's interests. That's what we are made to believe, and I think I also believe it. But hey, Uganda also has its own interests to protect. If you go by if media reports are anything to go by, you then go by what you have to quote what His Excellency Tshisekedi says. His Excellency Tshisekedi accuses his neighbor, one neighbor, for training and arming these groups. It is His Excellency Tshisekedi's words that you go by. But the other neighbor also refutes the other neighbor, together with M23, they refute what Tshisekedi says. What do you go with? Here are two facts. Number one, there is M23 in Congo. And number two, that M23 is armed. It is armed it is armed. And now those arms, according to Tshisekedi, they come from a hostile neighbor, hostile to him. Us who are on the side, we just go by the reports that we are given. And the thing is, Tshisekedi says Rwanda is arming M23, but M23 and Rwanda deny the accusation. I think it will be, if it goes deeper, it will be for another body to establish where these arms come from. Mm-hmm. His Excellency Tshisekedi was quoted again in the media last week, very livid, very clear that he's not going to sit down and talk to M23. And that livid response, those livid comments, elicited also responses from the M23 establishment. The reasoning that Tshisekedi gives is that when they go into peace talks, the peace talks, according to him, become building moments for M23. That they go to talk, but M23 is building to attack, building to all this, seeking information from them and etc. M23 is quick to now be pushing for dialogue. So the in between the lines is M23 is quick for dialogue, but Tshisekedi, for whom the militia group is on his soil, Tshisekedi says, I don't want to talk to you. And actually he goes ahead and says, once the Angolan forces come in, the East African force will be out, because probably he doesn't fully trust. I don't know. I don't want to read through his mind, but he says once the Angolan army arrives, the East African force will be out. Why? Maybe it's mistrust. Why? Maybe it's an arrangement they have discussed together. But also, Angola is not new in DRC. Angola has been there because Angola also has its own security concerns within the neighborhood of DRC. So what should we read through? I think Tshisekedi is reading a moment of I can take these guys on. I also read Tshisekedi probably is thinking to himself, if I have an armed group called M23 and I negotiate and give away something, yet within the country I have over 120 militia groups, what will I do with the other 120 plus militia groups? So at the back of his mind is probably, and probably the answer is probably, if I do for M23 like this, the other guys will also be in demand, and what will I do for the country? Thirdly, related with that, is, you see, Tshisekedi could also be thinking, should rebellion be rewarded? When people become rebellious, should you reward them? So those could be forming the basis for his responses. But finally, I also ask myself the question: he's had these groups for all this time and has not managed to beat them off. Is this language that he's using going to be the panacea for peace? And probably the answer to that question is there is more work that needs to be done in the DRC than just Tshisekedi refusing to talk to the M23, because it's a bigger question. Yeah. You see, the admission of a standby force in the admission of all these groups to come and help DRC stabilize its state is really an admission that Congo is a failing state. It's a case of a man, a household head, failing to close his gate, and the thieves enter. And then he begins crying to his neighbor, I left my gates open. Come and rescue me. You are in a weaker state. There is an admission that has to happen. The DRC security system is a weak security system. That's number one. But of course, as a president, you do not allow that is the truth. But the evidence on the ground shows his gates were open, his home is open, people have entered it, and they are doing whatever they want within that home. Now, in this case, what should he do? And all those who are trying to help DRC situation, I personally am what you would call an institutionalist. I believe in strong institutions. If you want to help DRC, help it build its institutions. Help build the DRC army to be able to defend its territory. Because in the current state, the DRC army is not able to defend its territory. So he will speak, because he has to speak, but there is evidence on the ground that the DRC is not able to protect its territory, and so M23 will leave space, other rebel groups will occupy it, other militia groups will occupy it, whatever. Finally, the answer will be with the DRC government. The DRC government has strengthened itself to be able to protect its borders. Short of that, we'll keep having similar questions like that you ask. Is Congo strong? No. Because on the basis you have 120 plus armed groups. So what should happen? Strengthen yourself. What happened when Uganda was fighting, when UPDF, I'll be specific, when UPDF was fighting in northern Uganda during the LRA insurgency, the UN didn't come to help us. Neighbors didn't come to help us. The UPDF strengthened and beat Kony to wherever he is. And that's what I believe. I believe that for DRC to be, the DRC government forces have to be strengthened for it to be able to protect its borders, but do it in such a way that the DRC country belongs to every citizen. It's not a discriminatory country, because it's part of the accusation against the government establishment. And you also cannot, you can't forget to talk about the role of what you call the political elites of the DRC. You can also call them deal makers, because war in Congo is now a business. Yeah? It's a business to an extent that the political class, the educated class, or the whatever, they know that if you can do something, cause some insurrection, you'll get some deal cut. Yeah? But also you can't take away the fact that Congo is a very rich, vastly rich country. And so it's in the interest of everybody. These militia groups, one will leave, another will occupy the space. But if you want to solve that, you strengthen the DRC security establishment.
Yes.
I have had one or two pundits say that that what's happening in Eastern DRC, specifically in the M23, that area, North Kivu, South Kivu, it's Rwanda versus Rwanda. That's what some pundit has said, that it's Rwanda, M23, because Tshisekedi says M23 is Rwanda. Across in Rwanda, they say the problem of here in DRC is FDLR, which is also of Rwanda's origin. So the guy says it's actually Rwanda versus Rwanda in Eastern DRC. Broadly, the Rwanda problem, because that is what perceptively the Eastern DRC is suffering from. The Rwanda problem is deep. It's big. It's deep. It's big, but it's also historical. It's historical in a sense that Rwanda will tell you that before the borders were defined by colonialism, there was a claim of Rwanda along that area. But of course, you ask the question, how far back can history go? So it's a complex problem. There is now a presence of what you can call peace. If you want to say peace is the absence of war. If you want to understand peace as the absence of war in Rwanda, you can say Rwanda is peaceful. It's peaceful, it is progressing, it is all these kinds of things. But Rwanda is aware it has a live enemy that now has even grandchildren, I think, in part of Congo. And those guys have become many to the extent that now, because the M23 is largely said to be of Banyamulenge descent, so there are issues. There are issues around there. How should that Rwanda problem in the DRC be solved? It's again a dialogue question. Can the FDLR, who were Hutu apologists, go back to Rwanda? The permutation or the mathematics in Rwanda now is different from what they left. And therefore, the political leaders of the region broadly have to have a wider conversation, an honest conversation, for example, that says it will be more complex because they quoted a figure of 1 million at some point. It will be more complex of a figure of 1 million that now has children and grandchildren to find its way back to Rwanda. But that kind of conversation, Rwanda and FDLR itself, and through M23, and I don't think they are able to handle it by themselves. They need a wider statesmen, stateswomen, a wider regional kind of conversation. For example, in that same context, Uganda had refugees of Rwandese descent, 1959 and far much before. They've become, they are, the Ugandans of Banyarwanda descent. They are Ugandans. How did that happen? There was a conversation in the 1995 Constitution, CA preparation process, that now, I think our Constitution talks about realizing our past that even involves refugees. The Banyarwanda are in the schedule of Ugandans. Probably DRC has to have that kind of conversation, and they agree, and also the Rwandans agree that there is a kind of conversation that is wider and deeper that can be facilitated by the experts within the region, but also the leaders within the region. On their own, they can't handle it. I think it's a political question that whose answer, like I said, is in a wider context, but also that the Congo government can help, because you see, if the Congo government takes hold of its territory, if you are powerful as an army, you can disarm the FDLR, you can disarm M23. But now they can't disarm them because the army is weak. So once they do, so it's back to Kinshasa. Let Kinshasa strengthen and control the whole of DRC. Once that happens, then they can be in charge of the wider conversation. It's up to them. Congo is big for all of them. It's big enough for all of them. Here is the reality. Kate, my dear sister, if you checked 100 years before you probably were, your ancestors were not where they are. We all came from somewhere. In a sense, we are all migrants. We migrated from somewhere. I can tell you, my ancestors have been here for about 100, maybe 150, 200 years, for about 200 years. But I know for a fact that we have our own descent in the DRC. So we are all migrants from somewhere. And therefore, the Congolese part of the problem that we have is the colonialists that redefined who we are. So that makes it difficult, but having realized that we are all migrants from somewhere, the Congolese can then face it up and say, now that we all migrated from somewhere, we can all live together here. But you can't reach that answer if you are in conflict. You must have peace for you to be able to have that kind of wide conversation. It's a vivid conversation, but it has to happen because, like I've said, even those who say we are ancestors from here, the honest truth is, if you're an African, you all came from somewhere which is not where you are currently located. My prediction is the issues in Congo are not to be about solved tomorrow. It's a fairly, can I call it long term? It's a fairly long-term conflict. It's not just M23. It is the other also many militia groups within the country, and so it will take a while. For now, what we are all looking at is M23, but yeah, it's a bigger crisis. Back to when they are pushed to the mountains, what will happen? They have been there before. Before their most recent attacks of last year, of this year, I think. Their most recent attacks, they came from, they had been in the mountains for quite a while. So there is nothing, they talk about a cycle of blood, or the cycle of violence. The cycle of violence repeats itself if you don't learn from history. So there is a probability that yes, the issues around M23, around that region, they are not about to end tomorrow. What will ultimately finish them, whether Tshisekedi, because he's going through an election, I think next year or about, whether Tshisekedi or his successor or whatever, it will ultimately, there has to be a way of the whole of Congo talking to each other vis-a-vis resolving the issues of arms and discrimination and etc. within their country, because it's big enough for each one of them.
Okay.